Middle Relief. Middle Relief with Mario and Musso on 1045 ESPN Baton Rouge. Now, let's go to the bullpen. Here's Mario Jerez and Matt Musso.
What's up, people? Welcome in to another edition of Middle Relief, Friday edition. Mario Jerez alongside Matt Musso. We do not have an audio producer right now.
Hey, he just walked in. Cade's here.
Yes, we do. Cade Wazan in the house to run audio production, and Paul O'Neill getting us on YouTube.
Mario, that's where it comes into play that both of us have run an audio board because we can just set it up and go anyway.
Men of many talents. We got our show started. And man, do we have a good one today. A whole lot to discuss. As Musso was saying off mic, very, very busy week around these parts and really nationally when it comes to all this name, image, and likeness stuff. We will get into that. Also, Jay Johnson is wrapping up his first week as LSU head baseball coach, and Stan Van Gundy has made public comments for the first time since he was fired by the New Orleans Pelicans. Should be a great show. How you doing, Musso?
Doing well. It's like you said, wrapping up a very busy week. A lot more coming out today about name, image, and likeness. There's new universities, other universities now saying new rules. Something very interesting from Darren Ravel about 10 minutes ago from the University of Georgia. That honestly is the first time I've seen this from a university where boosters are now getting involved. That's something that's not allowed by law in the state of Louisiana. So we can compare and contrast there. Again, yes, like you said, Stan Van Gundy, and Stan Van was fairly candid with Stu Gotts on Stupodity earlier today, and it talked Zion, it talked the decision. Was it mutual? Was it not? Was he surprised? What went wrong? Why did it happen? We'll get into all of that. It's going to be one more show before we head off for a long weekend, and we've got plenty to talk about once again.
Very much looking forward to the weekend. Very much looking forward to chopping it up with you for the first 2 hours. Then Jeremy Hill, as usual, will be here at 2 p.m. as we toss some football. And we have one guest in a 3 p.m. hour today, and that's former LSU linebacker Derry Beckwith. Derry Beckwith will join the show at 2:15. We'll get his thoughts on all this name, image, and likeness stuff. And as you said, Musso, there's so much nuance to this, and there are a lot of schools that have a lot of decisions to make really, really soon when it comes to all of this. But as far as LSU goes and the current athletes that are already benefiting from the name, image, and likeness laws, just a quick recap from yesterday. As we told you, Derek Stingley has signed with Walk-Ons. Miles Brennan has signed with several companies, including Smoothie King and Small Sliders. And then several LSU players, including Kayshon Boutte and Austin Deculus, have signed with Yoke Gaming, which we learned about yesterday. Very cool venture. Good for all of them. And a note today, it looks like Cade Beloso has agreed to a deal to promote his family's hot rod.
Cade has a very strong leg.
That's a different Cade.
Hot Rods Creole, which is his family business, and he can finally promote his family business, which is kind of crazy.
Isn't that nuts that the guy couldn't promote his own family's business?
Yeah.
Because the NCAA didn't want his family to make money that they weren't going to make off of their own son, their flesh and blood? Gosh.
Yeah, all of this is really...
man,
Yeah, all of this is really bad, and we were mentioning the comments made by a college basketball analyst. His name's escaping
Jay
me.
Billis.
Jay Billis, about how the NCAA should reinstate, all the people that were penalized for all this stuff and for ridiculous cases just like that. And maybe that's not such a bad suggestion because so many people have been screwed over by this.
It's not a bad suggestion at all. And it goes into what we talked about a little bit yesterday with Reggie Bush, right? Reggie Bush wants his records reinstated. He wants his Heisman back. And here's the thing. The Heisman Trust could do the right thing there.
They need to, because
the Heisman Trust can give him his trophy back.
He gave it back willingly. It's not like he scratched and clawed to try to keep it, and he did that with a purpose, Musso. I think he knew that this was coming, and you could tell by yesterday, by how active Reggie Bush was on Twitter, by all the statements he released. He was saying, okay, 10 years ago, I did the right thing. I acknowledge my mistake, although the fact that you're classifying it a mistake is totally ridiculous. But he gave it back. He did the right thing, so they should give it back to him.
They should. Will the Heisman Trust do that? I'm not sure. What I will say is the NCAA, I agree with Jay Billis. They should reinstate everything. Fab Five's records, like anything that was taken away for impermissible benefits, that should 100% be reinstated. They're not going to do it, though. It's not going to happen because The NCAA is not happy about this. Don't mistake that. They're not excited that this went down.
They were fighting it to the very end.
To the very, very end. And when they realized they were powerless to stop it, which honestly they should have realized way back when Florida and California did this first. But once they realized that they were actually powerless is the only time that they said, fine, we'll waive, that part of the bylaw with amateurism and blanket NIL and whatnot. They took an L here, and they're not happy about it. So they're not going to give in. What they're going to say is, doesn't matter if it broke laws. And I bet these schools, once the NCAA finally doesn't reinstate this, these schools will fight them on that too. And they will find themselves back in a courtroom, most likely, because it does violate antitrust law. But what the NCAA is going to say is, and we touched on this a little bit yesterday, is, well, that broke the rules when the rules were still in place, and rules are rules. And they're not going to do it unless they are forced to do it.
Again, a lot of nuance here, and the NCAA is going to have lots and lots of decisions to make really, really soon, as are the individual schools. We will discuss this topic throughout the show today, but before our first break, I did want to get your take on Jay Johnson's first official week as LSU head baseball coach. We discussed his opening presser at great length, and as I said, it's kind of hard to lose an opening press conference. You're going to say all the right things and all this, but I really like Jay Johnson's demeanor. He kind of showed that he's not the most charismatic, bold-faced guy, but he's really attention to detail oriented. I think that shows in his speech, and it showed by what he's already done. I mean, already a couple of players from Arizona seem to be following him to LSU. He got Mikey Romero, the very highly recruited shortstop from California, to flip his commitment, and he's going to come to LSU. Seems like overall it was a really, really good first week for Jay Johnson.
I would say so, 100%. Very busy as well. I mean, you kind of just ran through it. He already got 2 commits. High school commits. It looks like Jacob Berry is a strong possibility to end up at LSU. Not done, of course. It's not ever done until it's done, right? But that looks like a very strong possibility. He's made his rounds on the media now. You've had an LSU player enter the transfer portal in Zach Arnold, which is something we had on the rundown yesterday and didn't really get to talk about very much just because name, image, and likeness dominated the show as it should have been. I mean, that was the news of the day yesterday and honestly kind of today too, which we will have more talk about that later on. But the Zach Arnold thing's interesting. So Zach enters the transfer portal, right? And Jay Johnson ended up actually on AFR with Matt that afternoon and mentioned that there was a possibility that Zach Arnold could return to LSU next season. So it was more of a logistics thing, not necessarily maybe knowing it. To get the 11.7 to work, the scholarships, and that's something we talked about when we looked at roster management with him. I think that was on Wednesday, I believe, Mario. And it was, baseball is so different because you have to monitor the draft and what that can do to your high school recruits as well as the players on your own team. Then you have your returning guys, maybe the transfer portal as well. And you have to make that all fit into a roster of 35. And it's cut up between 11.7 scholarships. So it's difficult. And that was really the reasoning behind that. I think it opens the door for somebody like Jacob Berry to end up at LSU, and then you get into a whirlwind of situations on the infield because, that's a corner infielder, whether it be first base or third base for Berry. He can also DH. Cade Doty really found a strong home at third base. Trey Morgan's been phenomenal at first base for LSU as a college first baseman. Do you bump Doty and then bump Doty to second and let Berry play third? If he ends up here, of course, hypothetically, can he DH? So it was a really good first week that was busy, and it's only going to get busier as Jay Johnson continues week number 2, as he starts week number 2 and goes forward in his tenure at LSU.
So you could tell just by the attrition from the Arizona baseball team just how respected kind of Jay Johnson was, right? And I won't read through all of these names, but up to 12 players from Arizona are about to be in the transfer portal. And the biggest name is obviously Jacob Berry. And I did want to get kind of your extended take on him because a lot of people really, really excited about him. The numbers don't lie. Batting .352 last year with 17 home runs and 70 RBIs while winning second team All-America honors. You do have to move some stuff around, but potentially having him and Cruz and Trey Morgan all in the lineup has to make LSU's fans mouthwater. But
and Doty and potentially Gavin Dugas.
And all those guys. Again, you're going to have to maneuver some stuff around, but just the attrition and just somebody like that following his coach, I think speaks a lot to how much he's respected.
Right.
And LSU, it appears right now on July 2nd that they're going to be a team that can hit the ball really, really well. Again, bringing back the people from last year, bringing back more reinforcements. But there's still some questions about the pitching staff. What do you say to that?
No, that's absolutely right. So, I mean, there is still questions there, and that'll be the question going forward. And then they'll have to address it, and that'll come when they hire a pitching coach, and they're working hard to do that. So, it's like I said, it's been a busy first week for him already, but a lot of it is mainly just, the things that come with accepting a job, the media tours, the getting to know the players on your team, getting to know the recruits that you have coming in, organizing your, looking at your draft board now that you have and who could go, who could stay. And on top of that, he still has to hire a coaching staff. So it's, they went after J. Bob Thomas at Texas Tech. That didn't work out. There hadn't really been much to report on the potential LSU staff since then. So, and all that they're trying to, secure Jacob Berry. That's not done. So, he's not officially an LSU Tiger. He still has to commit to sign with LSU and enroll. So, there's plenty to be done, but as busy as the first week was, the next few will be much, much busier. The month of July is going to be rampant. One note about college baseball is they did not extend the transfer deadline. There was some thought that they might extend the transfer deadline past July 1st for college baseball. They did not. So anyone who did not enter the transfer portal yesterday, if they enter it after, will have to go through the waiver process, that normal waiver process that the NCAA has had. And it'll be interesting to see how lenient the NCAA is going to be there. I would imagine that the leniency is still there. And if you want to transfer, you're probably going to be immediately eligible because that's what was happening anyway before they even gave the blanket 1 year for these sports. So that is just something of note, though, for college baseball and logistics that will impact LSU because Jay Johnson is someone who has said, he said that on AFR the other day as well, that he has always used the transfer portal and they will use the transfer portal at LSU.
And as you said, he has lots of work to do and lots of work to do in the near future. And I think for people around these parts, Musso, it was kind of a good sports week. I was telling you off mic, Jay Johnson had a good first week as LSU head baseball coach. Ryan Ramchick re-signed with the Saints. But to me, the best news of the week was Darius Days agreeing to come back to the LSU basketball.
I'll take it.
For his senior season.
Yes, I will take that any day of the week, Cade. That, yes.
We will very much take it. And we
will Coach Wade.
Yeah, we went through some stats yesterday, Musso, when we were talking about Darius Days. And it's huge not only for the LSU basketball team that can really use his skills, his size, his shooting, his defense, but also for him. I think it's the right move because I think him coming back one more year, honing in on the rest of his skills to round out his game, improving his ball handling, improving his shooting by just a little bit, things like that can really make him a much better NBA player. And it can make him go from not on anybody's draft board to somebody teams are paying attention to, especially if LSU is able to make a run to the NCAA tournament and he's able to do big things there.
It's going to be a fun offseason camp season leading up into LSU basketball this year to talk about this team. And I'm very, very, we kind of got our first taste of being able to do that on earlier this week when Days announced he was coming back. I believe that was Tuesday. So that is a massive get for Coach Wade and his staff and for that team. And they have a legitimate shot to not only win the SEC overall championship, but make a deep, deep run in March and possibly do something at LSU that's really never been done. I know whatever, 1935 or whatever it is, sure. LSU's never won the NCAA tournament, and they really could have a legitimate chance to do that with the roster that Coach Wade has assembled.
Which is crazy with everything they lost from last year, right? Losing the Big Four and Wofford and Javonte Smart and all those guys. But what Coach Wade has done, not only through traditional recruiting, but with how proactive he's been in the transfer portal and getting guys like Adam Miller and Xavier Pinson to come over, it looks like LSU has kind of rounded out a starting five. When you talk about Xavier Pinson, Adam Miller coming over from Illinois, Tari Eason, the transfer from Cincinnati, and then Darius Days and Efton Reed, that is a really good squad. And we're not even getting into the guys that are returning, like Eric Gaines and Sharif O'Neal, who are surely going to contribute more than they did last season. So not just a solid starting five, but the role players as well. And LSU rounding out to be a really, really good team coming up in 2021.
Let's get after it.
So LSU basketball will continue to get ready for the season. Jay Johnson will continue to do what he needs to do in his first week as head LSU baseball coach, and college athletes will continue to get compensated. That we know for sure. We'll come back to middle relief and talk a little bit of NBA. Stan Van Gundy has made his first public comment since being let go by the New Orleans Pelicans. We'll get into what he said and a whole lot more here on Middle Relief, 1045 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Middle Relief with Mario and Musso on 1045 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Welcome back in to Middle Relief. Mario Jerez alongside Matt Musso, Cade Wazan on the audio board, Paul O'Neill getting us on YouTube. Former New Orleans Pelicans head coach Stan Van Gundy has made his first public comments since his split with the organization. He went on the Stupidity podcast with Stugotz and Dan Le Batard, and he had a lot to say, Musso. He talked about Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram. He talked about the report from The Athletic talking about Zion Williamson's family being displeased with the organization. He had a whole lot to say, so let's get into some of it right here. This was Stan Van Gundy on whether or not he was surprised by the Pelicans' decision on letting him go.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised. I mean, because, not only 1 year, but it was 4 weeks after the end of the season. And so, normally if that stuff's going to happen, it's going to happen pretty quickly at the end of the year, and it didn't. So, yeah, I was surprised. And the day it happened, I was sort of taken aback.
Do you remember Andrew Lopez coming on our show the day this happened?
I do.
And him talking about the Pelicans staff retreats? Because I think something specifically went down there between maybe not between Stan Van Gundy and David Griffin directly, but somebody in the organization and Stan Van Gundy. Because going into that retreat, like Stan Van just said, the first 3 weeks after he was fired, this didn't really seem to be a possibility. But whenever they started laying down the vision for next year, they started butting heads somewhere, and it's clear that something went down on that staff retreat.
The timing was always strange of it, wasn't it? I mean, they all seemed aligned at the end of season press conferences. I mean, everybody, David Griffin, Zion Williamson, Lonzo Ball, Stan Van Gundy, anyone who got in front of a microphone that week or that day when they had their end of season meetings with the media, they were all aligned that none of that was good enough. This is what we have to do to get better, and this is what we're going to work on. And while people weren't happy with the performance from Stan Van Gundy, me included, you were saying, okay, it was 1 year. Sure, you expected them to make the playoffs. That honestly was a fair expectation. They didn't, but you move forward. And then 3 weeks later after that, that's the first week of he's gone. So the timing was always curious. And yeah, I do. I remember Andrew saying that something at those retreats, it just, after that, it seemed like it was really on the rocks.
And there was a lot of talk on whether or not this was a mutual decision. And when it happened, I treated it just like a firing. And again, we talked to Andrew Lopez that same day, and he said not so fast. Maybe it was a mutual decision. Well, Stan Van Gundy didn't seem to think it was a mutual decision. And this is what he had to say about that topic on Stupidity.
It was joint in this sense that I don't want to be somewhere where they don't want me, and they didn't want me. And so I wasn't at that point gonna fight to try to stay there. So it wasn't a mutual decision. It was funny when I left Detroit, my owner there, who I really liked, Tom Gores, also said it was a mutual decision. And I said, yeah, Tom asked me to leave, and so I left. This is the same thing.
It was a firing, and it's clear that he's a little frustrated that the Pelicans tried to present it as anything other than a firing, which I understand why they did that. They're trying to show some respect to the coach that just got fired, but clearly he did not think it was mutual, and that does not surprise anybody.
Is it ever mutual? I mean, very, very rarely.
In very rare cases.
Very rarely. That's a buzzword that they use to make this seem like it ended on good terms. This obviously didn't. The way he began that, it was mutual in the sense that I don't want to be somewhere where they don't want me and they didn't want me.
Yeah. It's not like he has a choice in the matter, though. Clearly, they did not want him. Clearly, year one of Stan Van Gundy did not go very well. And David Griffin, I think, deserves some credit for pulling the trigger and letting him go. If the players were not feeling him, and that's the important thing in the NBA right now, knowing what your players want and not dictating building the team based on exactly what they want and what they say, but definitely getting the most out of Brandon Ingram, getting the most out of Zion Williamson, getting the most out of your core. And clearly Stan Van Gundy did not do that. And for whatever reason, he and the Pelicans were not on the same page going forward. They talked about philosophical differences whenever he was fired. David Griffin did. But whenever Stan Van went on Stupidity, he seemed to imply it had a little bit more to do with his coaching specifically and how he was coaching the team. And this is what he had to say about not being on the same page with David Griffin and with Pelicans management.
It was clear, I think in our postseason meetings, it's fair to say that we were just, and I don't want to get into a lot of the details of it.
Sure.
We just weren't on the same page at all about, what coaching is all about and how coaches should be judged and everything else. We just look at coaching totally differently. And that became clear, probably a little bit during the season, but certainly after the season. We're just on two totally different pages. And
then what's the higher? I mean, that's the one that really aggravated me.
It would have been nice if you realized that while, during the interview, when you were interviewing him to be the head coach.
Did coaching philosophy not come up at all in the interview, David Griffin? Was that not at all discussed? Did you not ask him, hey, look, this is our roster. What do you think we can do with it? And when he tells you, did it not, I don't know, give off a little bit of a red flag that that's not necessarily what I want for my organization? Did you really have to let them blow 14 leads in 14 games before realizing this probably isn't going to work? What are you doing? I mean, come on.
Yeah. At least he called him.
Yeah. But I mean, like you said, David Griffin deserves credit for pulling the trigger and making the move. He also deserves a hell of a lot of blame if the head coach or former head coach is going to say, clear we weren't on the same page. And honestly, it was clear even in the season.
Yeah, the worst part.
Come on.
The worst part, Musso, is it's worse than that because it goes back deeper than that because he extended Alvin Gentry when he first got here. A lot of people don't bring that up, but Alvin Gentry's contract was extended before he was fired, less than a year into David Griffin's tenure. And then going back to the Cleveland Cavaliers, he brought in David Blatt, and this was the exact same scenario that Zion Williamson is going through right now with LeBron James. He did not like the new head coach. It was total philosophical differences. He was coming over from Europe where he was really successful, but the players did not like him. What happened? They fire him. Ty Lue is elevated. They win the championship, and now Ty Lue is the best coach in the NBA playoffs, or was, So my point is David Griffin has been making these wrong choices for a long time. It didn't just start with Stan Van Gundy.
You got a big choice coming up. I mean, that's kind of where we can dovetail before we get to the last one is now, I mean, the two names everyone's focusing on now is Charles Lee and
Willie Green.
Willie Green from the Phoenix Suns. And both those teams are still playing. So I guess you wait a little longer. We had Jake Madison on earlier this week. And when I asked him the question, does this mean that it's, when Jacques Vaughn pulls his name out and they still haven't hired somebody, does it mean they're absolutely waiting on somebody like Charles Lee in the playoffs? He said, probably, but don't be so sure it's him. There could be other names. And the next day, Willie Green's name pops up. I mean, we've talked a lot about Charles Lee. We haven't talked a lot about Willie Green yet.
Yeah, and the one guy, the dude that's like doing like Cliff Godwin was, that's just waiting and chilling and seeing if he gets offered the job, is Fred Vinson, the assistant Pelicans head coach. And Stan Van actually brought him up today. It's not in any of our audio cuts, but he did talk about Fred Vinson and that he hopes that he gets an opportunity to be the head coach because, again, Fred Vinson has been on the Pelicans and Hornets staff. That's how long he's been on the staff. He was there when they were the Hornets. And he coached under Monty Williams and Alvin Gentry and Stan Van Gundy. And he's been one of the best shooting coaches in the NBA. I mean, I think that's a clear argument. The work that he's done with Tyreek Evans and with Anthony Davis and culminating in Lonzo Ball, who was one of the worst shooters in the NBA and now is one of the best. He's really good at what he does. The question is, can he do it as a head coach? But again, he's the one guy that's kind of waiting in the wings. And as you said, the big names right now are Charles Lee and Willie Green. Before we go to break, I did want to get to one last Stan Van Gundy cut because a lot of his firing was based on Zion Williamson, right? And what did Zion think? And Zion wasn't gelling with him. Well, he seems to think Zion Williamson should not have so much blame for his firing.
I don't know anything about that. In my mind, I liked coaching Zion. I had a good relationship with him. I had no problem. And I think we elevated his platform that we gave him. We put him in different situations, had him handling the ball a lot, playing a lot of point guard. I thought we did some good things with him. If they were unhappy, I didn't hear about it. Zion was unhappy with us not winning more games, but Zion never expressed to me any of that. That doesn't mean he wasn't unhappy. And I don't know. I mean, it's possible. Players certainly have the right to express their opinion to people and things like that, but front offices and owners make decisions, and they're the ones that decide to fire people. And regardless of what happened in that regard, Zion's no coach killer.
Well,
And tell that to Mike McCarthy that Aaron Rodgers didn't get him fired.
Yeah.
That players don't get coaches fired.
He's on his third coach in 3 years. Maybe he's not a coach killer, but that is a fact.
Yeah, there's something that's not jiving there. And Stan did the right thing there. I mean, he gave kind of the PC answer. There's too much smoke around that for there to not be at least a little bit of fire. That Zion and his family were, and BI to an extent, were unhappy with the current Pelicans staff and the head coaching position and the philosophy on the team and the way things were going. They are the ones who make the money in the organization, right? That's what we talk about all the time in pro sports. It's not the head coach that gets paid the most, it's the players. And they're going to have pull. And I 100% believe that there was at least something there. Maybe that's not the sole reason it happened, but there has to be something there. But, good on Stan Van Gundy for taking the high road there, I guess, to an extent.
Yeah, and to his credit, he did that right away. Like the day he was fired, he tweeted that was like, this is not Zion's fault. This is not Brandon Ingram's fault. And maybe it's not their fault per se, but Stan Van Gundy is really, really naive if he thinks that when David Griffin sat down with both Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson, when both of those guys did their individual end-of-season meetings, that they did not bring up Stan Van Gundy and the fact that they did not like his coaching style and the fact that they think somebody else might do a better job. There is a reason why he was fired and created all this instability. 3 coaches in 3 years is not a good scenario to be in, but clearly David Griffin thinks that's the best scenario to be in, and there's no way he would reach that decision without any input from Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram both.
And Stan Van Gundy's decision to feel like he had to tweet that the day he got fired tells you that he knew that was going to be a storyline because there's probably something there with it.
100%. You could tell on the court, Musso. I mean, it wasn't really a secret. Those guys didn't come out and curse Stan Van Gundy's name, but you could see the body language.
Because they're professionals. And that's just, you don't do that unless you're someone like James Harden.
Yeah.
Or just, who's going to act like a child and force his way out of a situation. I mean, that's...
Yeah, or Rajon Rondo refusing to take the court when he was on the Dallas Mavericks. Like stuff like that has happened, and these are young guys. That's what I really like about the Pelicans going forward. That Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram are both young, coachable players. They're not arrogant. They don't have this holier than thou attitude. They want to get better. They want somebody to coach them. But it's clear that they think that Stan Van Gundy was holding them back a little bit, and I think that's a huge reason why David Griffin made this move. You'd be naive to think otherwise.
100%. And now he's like, look. And this is what we're going to talk about. I mean, that right there, his first public comments, that closes the Stan Van Gundy conversation. Now it is 100% go forward, hire your guy. Whether that be Willie Green, whether that be Charles Lee, whether they maybe they go for it. It doesn't seem like that's the direction they're going to go in, but one of those two guys, and I mean, Willie Green fits it a lot. He's a former player. That's what a lot of players in the NBA want now, as a former player to coach them. That fits. I mean, Charles Lee was a player, but not in the NBA, so I think it's going to be one of those two guys, and I think, if the Hawks can pull it off, you'll find out real quick if it's going to be Charles Lee. And if it's not him, they're probably waiting for Willie Green.
Lots of work for the Pelicans and David Griffin to do. NBA draft is coming up in a couple of weeks now, or in a few weeks, July 26th. So lots of things for David Griffin, lots of things for the New Orleans Pelicans to figure out. We will come back to middle relief and continue to talk name, image, and likeness before we wrap up the hour here on 1045 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Middle Relief with Mario and Musso on 1045 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Welcome back into Middle Relief. Mario Jerez alongside Matt Musso. NIL laws causing a lot of change. A lot of players are getting paid, and there's a whole lot of nuance when it comes to this, Musso. Yesterday, we talked a lot about Arkansas, the University of Arkansas, saying that their players can't engage in deals with their corporate partners. Like anybody that has exclusive rights to the University of Arkansas can't compensate the players to have them promote their business or work with them at all. And now Darren Ravel has put up a really interesting tweet from this morning saying that the University of Georgia Compliance Department has sent a note to boosters saying that they can directly message athletes on social media and pay them for posts or autographs as long as it's commensurate with fair market value. Note, no one thus far has determined what fair market value is.
So that's interesting for a couple reasons. One, that's really the first instance that I've seen so far. Maybe I missed one, but that's the first one that I've seen so far where boosters can have like direct interaction and do business with the athletes. I know here in Louisiana, It's in the law that an athlete cannot sign on with a booster's business. They can't do like media posts for it, autographs or anything like that. Now, this does just say social media posts and autographs. It doesn't necessarily say that they could, promote their business, but I would imagine that's what the social media post would be. And I'd imagine that's where the autograph sessions would take place, is at that person's business. So that's interesting. That's where you get into a lot of people's fears about recruiting, right? And the recruiting advantage that these boosters are just going to, funnel money into people. Like I said, this is the first instance I've seen of this, but that's something to watch with this, because there's going to be a lot of differences. And I know that's been a fear of people's as well, is it's not the same law everywhere. Each state has a different law, and that's where I think the imbalance comes in. You look at a place like LSU. LSU is one of the only universities that's allowing its athletes to use the marks in the facilities. That can provide LSU a huge advantage. But I think one reason LSU is doing that is because they realize that it helps their brand out too.
Yeah.
Georgia is not allowing that. Texas is not allowing that. Georgia sent an entire list out, just like LSU did, of do's and don'ts to their athletes. And, a lot of it's the same, but that's these are two of the biggest differences, is the use of facilities in campus. Georgia's not allowing that. LSU is. And of course the marks. And now Georgia's going to allow boosters to get involved in LSU, and really any school in the state is not going to allow that. So and again, like Ravel said, no one's determined what fair market value is. But there's still a lot to iron out. Ultimately, I still think this is a very good thing. But now you're starting to see in day two. Yesterday was the celebratory day, and looking at all the deals everybody's, signing and who they're agreeing to and what the figures are going to look like. Now you get into I don't want to say the dirty part, because I don't think it's dirty, but the more gray area of, okay, how do you make this work and create a little bit of a little bit of more balance in it? And that's going to have to happen between states and the schools, because that's who's in charge of this now, not the NCAA.
It's very nuanced, and we're not actually getting into the actual sport and how will these athletes balance all this with what they're already doing and going to school and playing sports. And I think Scott Rabelais, friend of the program, Scott Rabelais, has a really good write-up right now up at theadvocate.com, where he explores 3 different questions. And I kind of want to go through those questions with you right here, Musso. The first one is, he asks, amongst the team itself, will jealousy be a factor here? Will jealousy at sometimes be rampant? And Scott says, what if a third-string quarterback makes more than like a starting offensive line or a fullback? Is that going to create any jealousy? Is that going to create an uncomfortable situation? I think there's kind of a lot of that right now with the athletes getting compensated, but, different positions hold different value in the eyes of many people, and it's not fair in many instances. So I don't know if it's going to create any more jealousy than already exists right now, but it is a fair question.
So I have 2 schools of thought on this, and I know we talked a little bit about this off air. We didn't necessarily bring it on air yesterday, but we will today. Here's my first school of thought. So Ross Dellinger at SI wrote a great article this morning, posted it this morning, on De'Aaron King. And De'Aaron King, quarterback at Miami. I think a lot of people know De'Aaron King's story. At Houston, there was LSU going to go after him when he entered the transfer portal? He ends up at Miami, has a really good year last year. He has kind of blown up. He's been one of the most successful football players so far in this. He's got over $20,000 worth of deals already.
And is a club promoter in South Beach. That's no small thing.
Started that last night, actually. Started promoting. Literally had a party at the club last night. So also something that De'Aaron King wants to do, though, and it's mentioned in that piece by Ross Dellinger over at SI, is he wants to have team events around NIL and take the money and split it up evenly between everybody on the team. So that's a way to counteract the jealousy in the locker room. I would expect more players to want to do that. Him and his offensive line go and they have an autograph session. And whatever they do, they can split that up between all of them or throughout the whole team, even if they wanted to do that. Or, there's an autograph session for the entire team. You host the entire team. You split it. There's a way to do that. There is a way to make it. Now, I understand that's not always going to be equal. You're still going to do some things on your own that'll allow you to make more money. And that's where the second school of thought comes in. And that guy's just more, he's more marketable than you.
That's what I'm saying. It already exists right now.
And it might not be always the starting quarterback. Like Scott said, what if the third string quarterback makes more money than a starting O-lineman because that third string quarterback has a great presence on social media or, something like that. And it's not fair, but guess what? That's tough. Like it's not. Sorry. He's good at marketing himself. He shouldn't have to be penalized or he shouldn't have to feel guilty about that. Could it create jealousy? Sure, but there's jealousy in a locker room already. It might not be to that extent, right? But I say that because there's jealousy everywhere in the world. That's just a human nature. So, I mean, those are my two schools of thought. There's a way to get around it like what De'Aaron King wants to do, and I think more people will do things similar to that. And after that, it's just, well, he's good at this, and he deserves to be compensated because he's good at this. And, you know, what you see is what you get. It's not always going to be fair. Life is not fair.
Yeah, I agree with your second school of thought because, again, it's kind of already like that, and people know that. And the second question that Scott asked, which I don't want to spend too much time on because I just don't think it's very realistic, to be honest with you. He says, if a coach has a sponsorship and a player swoops in and takes some of that sponsorship, does that affect his playing time?
That'd be hilarious, first of all. I think that's realistic.
If Miles Brennan takes some of Coach O's Raising Cane's money,
I think that's real. Yeah, I mean, you don't think that's realistic?
I think
not
to the point where
absolutely realistic.
Not to the point where it like bothers the coach.
Maybe not to that point, but I mean, I think it's realistic that a player could end up. I mean, it might be a special case. It might have to be like a special player, like a Heisman Trophy winning player or somebody. But I mean, this is completely hypothetical, obviously, but is it possible for a Heisman Trophy winning player to be a bigger name than the head coach of that program?
100%.
Well, then, I mean, I don't know if the business would drop the head coach completely, but I think you could actually absolutely see a player be brought on.
Yeah, I mean, at a school that's established like Nick Saban, you know that company's not going to give any of the money they're giving to Nick Saban to the player. But a program that's trying to build up, let's say Indiana's a bad example because Allen's a good coach, but a program that's building up and is really, you know, dependent on this player to get their program to somewhere they haven't been, they might make a move like that, and that might create some tension. So I guess I see what you're saying, but it would be a really special case like that.
Yeah, but it'd be a special case. But I mean, I don't think it's totally unrealistic. What I think is unrealistic is I don't think a brand would just completely drop the head coach in favor of a player. I think it'd be more of a joint thing, but could that cause some friction? Maybe. But look, if you're going to demote a kid's playing time because of that, well, then look in the mirror. That's your problem.
Yeah, this has to be. Come on. This has to be part of the recruiting process. As crazy as it is, this has to be part of the recruiting process. You have to know how much you're willing to give up to have this player come on, right? I mean, if that happens, this kid can probably ball out, right? And the coach probably already sacrificed a whole lot to get him to this school. So I don't know. Maybe again, this is so interesting, Musa, because as you're saying, there's so much gray area. There's so much nuance, and we might see scenarios like this in college football. And it's a really cool thought. We're kind of running out of time, so I wanted to ask Scott's third question coming up next segment. Then we'll wrap up the hour. This is Middle Relief with Mario Jerez and Matt Musso, 1045 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Middle Relief with Mario and Musso on 1045 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Welcome back into Middle Relief. Mario Jerez alongside Matt Musso. We can continue exploring this question from Scott Rabelais as we go in the show, but the final question that he asked concerning name, image, and likeness in his most recent write-up over at theadvocate.com, to me, Musso, this was the most interesting question. He asks, will some student athletes spend so much time promoting their brand and making appearances, and yes, even selling their time to play video games with fans, that they don't spend enough time honing the skills that made them so marketable in the first place? And could performance clauses for college athletes even follow suit? Like I said, this is the most interesting one to me because common sense tells you, Musso, that if you're a student athlete, maybe that's not the term they're going to use anymore, but if you're going to school and you're playing a sport like football or any sport that requires so much dedication, that's a lot of your time taken up. And if you're now putting in something else that you have to spend your time in and marketing yourself and compensating yourself, it could cause a distraction and it could take away from you honing on the skills that made you so marketable in the first place.
Yeah, this is absolutely probably going to carry over to the next hour because I have a lot of thoughts because this is going to be a problem. It's not going to be a problem for everybody, but it will be a problem for some. And I think if you just shun it off as no, it won't, then I think you're being naive because I think this absolutely will be. Again, I'll go reference that piece from Ross Dellinger and the De'Aaron King story that he put out earlier this morning at SI. In it kind of detailed King's day. So at 12:01 a.m., he was awake at 12:01 a.m. on Thursday. That was the earliest he could sign a deal under the new law in the state of Florida. And he signed right there at 12:01. He got to sleep at about 1 o'clock. Was up at 5 because he had to go through a 2.5-hour workout program at Miami. Off-season workouts, weights, all that. Did that. Goes into like film, eats some lunch. By 3 o'clock, he's at the bar that he's going to promote, the club, whatever it is, for a ceremony there. Goes home for a little bit. And then he's back out at the bar again that night for that promotion event. Couldn't stay out too late, though, because he has more workouts the next day, and the whole process repeats itself. And that is going to be something that guys like De'Aaron King, who are so marketable, will have to deal with. And others throughout the country who we mentioned yesterday. It will require a lot of maturity. It will require a lot of discipline. It will require organization. Where I think you have success with it is people like De'Aaron King who are older, the older players. Where I believe this becomes a bigger issue is maybe that highly touted recruit freshman who comes in.
Because they're kids. They're literally kids.
And they're going to learn about this for the first time, going into college, having to manage time, name, image, and likeness, marketability, and all of that. And that's where I think it becomes an issue. And I know we have to go, so we can dovetail that into the first segment of the next hour and continue.
Yeah, and the first thing that comes into my mind is how many people praised Joe Burrow during the season that he won the Heisman Trophy because he was never on his phone. I believe he gave his phone to his parents or something like that. And people said, how rare is it for a college kid to do that? But Joe Burrow was dialed in, and obviously you could tell he was honing in on his skills because he won the Heisman Trophy that year. Do people think a little